In the 2020s, there's been a phenomenon of cozy games, ones that celebrate the boring, the mundane, and give priority to relaxation over accomplishing any goal. Think about the meditative experience of Firewatch, of Stardew Valley, or of Abzu. Now, none of these games have a singular genre to tie them together, but there's a certain feel that oozes from them all. By combining these beautiful soundtracks and soothing visuals, along with a distinct lack of defined goals, there's a sense of comfort that comes from these games. It's a peacefulness that we don't often get from our lives anymore. The rise of games in this category isn't a coincidence. It's a consequence of the overwhelming exhaustion caused by our modern condition. In a society that is obsessed with productivity, we're made to see every moment as time for profit generation, unable to take a break lest we fall behind our peers. In doing so, we become trapped in an anxious cycle of overwork. These fantasy worlds give us more than just an escape from the constant need to be productive, but they provide us with a critique of our culture, allowing players to just be, without a defined goal or societal pressure. In Byung-Chul Han's book, The Burnout Society, he diagnoses the causes of this anxious world. He does so by going to the very basis of our society, neoliberalism. Quote, "Individual freedom is the cunning of capital. We believe that we're free, but deep down, we just produce, we increase capital. That is, capital uses individual freedom to reproduce. That means that we, with our individual freedom, are the sexual organs of capital." Under neoliberalism, the freedom of the individual is nothing more than an economic freedom. Ideally, we're free to sell and buy things as we choose, with little oversight from the government. This laissez-faire capitalism is the ultimate goal of neoliberalism, where regulation is dismantled and entities are free to trade as they like. According to the proponents of this ideology, this creates freedom for the individual and negates the power of their oppressors. Further, this gives the power to the individual to pursue whatever opportunities they may see. But the neoliberal view of freedom doesn't take into account nearly anything but private property rights. Proponents of the system ignore equality, worker exploitation, environmental problems, and the lack of any protection for marginalized groups. Can a worker who lives in Flint, Michigan really be called free? How about the millions of workers across the world being paid below poverty wages? Is that freedom? When there isn't any opportunities to seize and the only way out of starvation is a job that pollutes water supplies, is this not coercion? While I believe the bigger issues of neoliberalism can be seen in the exploitation of the global south, Byung-Chul Han does not touch on these points, but rather he takes on an approach that is much more representative of the established economies of North America or Europe. I think it's a serious blind spot in his work, and while I find it important to talk about our modern condition, I would be remiss to not at least mention the consequences of this globalization. But anyways, Han argues that freedom isn't liberation from control, but in fact, it's the opposite. The word is used as a smokescreen to try and mask the new form of oppression taking over, one that no longer needs an outside other to operate. We are made to become our own oppressors, striving for continuous productivity and self-optimization. It's exhausting. Work once had set hours, but this new productivity doesn't. We are expected to continue around the clock, whether or not someone is watching, to get things done in the name of profit, to continue making more and more money. If you like what you're seeing so far, go ahead and give it a like. If you want to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button. Thank you, and back to the video. A cycle of self-exploitation is much more efficient for the capitalists than the old way of doing things. You had to have a deep infrastructure to strike fear into the workers, using the stick rather than the carrot. This old way of doing things was called the disciplinary society, the idea of which was introduced by Foucault. This society, born out of the Industrial Revolution, encouraged work through punishment. Quote, "The exercise of discipline presupposes a mechanism that coerces by means of observation, an apparatus in which the techniques that make it possible to see induce effects of power, and in which, conversely, the means of coercion make on those whom they are applied clearly visible." What this boils down to is that workers used to be coerced into labor through fear of punishment. The rigid hierarchies of our places of labor ensured the subservience of these workers. Foucault explains that this power operated through surveillance and mechanisms that, quote, "works on the body and into the souls of the inmates." Inmates in this case being anyone who is subject to conditions of rigid hierarchy. These workers feared the consequences of deviating from their bosses. This is how the world of industrial capitalism was ran, with fear. The people in charge wanted you to know that they were in charge, and showed you the consequences of disobedience. Quote, "It is polyvalent in its applications. It serves to reform prisoners, to instruct school children, to confine the insane, to supervise workers, to put beggars and idlers to work." But this form of oppression can only do so much. Once the workers are out of the factory, you can't go to their home and continue to force them to be productive. You might only get 8, maybe 12 hours a day out of someone at that rate. The capitalists want more production. They want more products, and they want you spending more time on producing money for them. But they can't do that when working hours are the only time you're doing anything. And this is where the achievement society comes into play. When, instead of fearing punishment, you're chasing success, you can be made to work more. As Byung-Chul puts it, quote, "The freedom of can generates even more coercion than the disciplinarian should, which issues commandments and prohibitions. Should has a limit. In contrast, can has none. Technically, freedom means the opposite of coercion and compulsion. Being free means being free from constraint. But now freedom itself, which is supposed to be the opposite of constraint, is producing coercion." Coercion hasn't disappeared, it is just regrouped into a much more efficient system. Outward oppression has turned into an internal drive to continue achieving more and more. The shift from should to can make us think that everything we are doing is of our own volition, that we're doing this because we're free, and this is how we want to spend our time. And this makes it all the more difficult to escape this world of burnout. Rest is seen as a sign of weakness in our society. Time spent playing video games, watching TV, or just sitting around is viewed as something we need to cut out, to make more time for production. So among this cycle of auto-exploitation, the emergence of cozy games seems like an act of rebellion. These games that prioritize relaxation and good vibes are so antithetical to our hustle culture, and yet they continue to consistently gain popularity. As you can see, I'm a pretty big Stardew Valley fan. I've sunk hundreds of hours into this game that is primarily about building relationships, decorating, and farming. A digital stillness is achieved as we play. While it is certainly possible to grind and keep achieving, it is also possible to do the exact opposite. Reflecting on what fish you want to put in your aquarium, what NPC you want to marry, or even just the layout of your farm. It fulfills a fantasy for the player, one where you are able to afford a place to live, build relationships, and enjoy your community. At its heart, Stardew Valley and games like it are a form of cultural critique. Continual progress isn't awarded. In fact, beyond a certain point, it isn't even possible. Reflection and peace are at the heart of these games. They provide an absolutely necessary time of pause and reflection in a world that is otherwise addicted to productivity. It's a protest against the expectation of everyone surrounding us to be hustling, even if it's just for a few minutes at a time. These kind of games are also a far cry from the traditional point of games, competition. There are no high stakes, there is no fighting others. The point of the game is to slow down. And not only that, but in a lot of these games, you can kind of mirror your ideal day. Program in your routines to make every day enjoyable. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. If you just sat around and fished the entire game, nobody would tell you otherwise. These games are anti-production to their core. The popularity of them alone should directly serve as a critique to our culture. In a world that is so infatuated with production, rest is a form of rebellion. Even in a world where so much bad is happening, rest is still not a waste of your time. Your own well-being and rest is crucial not just for yourself, but for the people and the things you are fighting for. Even if it is for a good cause, you shouldn't be working 24/7. This is a symptom of the burnout society that you think that way. And a good first step to dismantling this culture is by challenging its norms. Another symptom of our achievement society, according to Byung-Chul, is the excess of positivity and the lack of negativity. What does he mean by this exactly? Positivity is defined as things that we can do, rather by things that we must do. Because of the amount of things we can do, we no longer have time in our schedule to do nothing. Quote, 21st century society is no longer a disciplinary society, but rather an achievement society. Also, its inhabitants are no longer obedient subjects, but achievement subjects. They are entrepreneurs of themselves. That phrase, entrepreneurs of themselves, does a great job of describing the cultural paradigm we're in. Everyone needs to be a self-starter, a hustler, an entrepreneur in this culture. How many people do you know that are trying to get a business off the ground, trying to make enough money to quit their jobs and focus on what they really love? This is the goal of the capitalists, to continue to dangle the carrot on a stick in front of them, to never let the hustler lose sight of their end goal, rest. One of the ways this culture is perpetrated is through the self-help industry. A billion-dollar conglomerate of authors, speakers, influencers, and companies fighting for your attention. These people are some of the worst offenders of the grind mentality. People like Gary Vee, who claims to work every waking hour of every day, up to 18 hours. Or Tony Robbins, who loves to give talks at MLM companies to convince members that your big break is right around the corner. These hucksters keep people trapped in the oppressive cycle of production. They think that if they just reach their next goal, if they just start this business, that it's going to work out. Yet the industry keeps pumping out books, seminars, coaching programs, podcasts, and countless other products to continue pulling these people in. They're operating at the very same level as everyone else, continuous production in order to gain more and more profits. The industry also helps achieve another goal of the capitalist class, individualization. By atomizing the workers, collective action becomes much more difficult. We're told to pick ourselves up by our bootstraps, and that everything we need to do, we can do by ourselves. Once again, it is a subversive form of destroying community, of destroying the collective, and ensuring that the people stay down. The oppression with positivity prevails yet again. Byung-Chul believes the malady of our times is too much positivity. It's the very thing that makes the system what it is. Quote, "Burnout system occurs when the ego overheats, which follows from too much of the same. The hyper and hyperactivity is not an immunological category. It represents the massification of the positive." In the Burnout Society, he's trying to give a diagnosis to what we all see. Burnout, depression, ADHD, anxiety, they're all on an incline, and he wants to get to the root of this problem. He believes that it stems from the lack of negativity, or some big other that we're fighting against. Instead of the other of our boss, teacher, or other powerful figures, we have this positive drive of possibility. Our real enemy is production now. To defeat it, we have to be unproductive. But at its basic level, isn't that what we're getting sold? Isn't that why we're working so hard? Is because one day we might achieve some rest? Aren't we promised this life of leisure once we've produced enough? Isn't that why we have retirement age? It's a guaranteed couple of years of rest after working this hard. But I don't want to wait that long for a break, and I'd hazard a guess to say that you don't want to either. So what is the solution to this? Well, you have to use rest as a form of rebellion. I've been illustrating this through cozy games this whole time, but it can literally extend to any hobby that isn't meant to be profited off of. Byung-Chul is a big fan of gardening and playing piano, for example. In another one of his books, Vita, Contemplativa, he argues for a radical rethinking of how we should be spending our time. To no longer think of time that isn't used as production as rest or free time, since, once again, we're thinking about productivity in mind when we have these terms. But instead, we need a radical shift in what it is to be inactive. Quote, "We owe true happiness to the useless and purposeless, to what is intentionally convoluted, what is unproductive, indirect, exuberant, superfluous, to beautiful forms and gestures that have no use and serve no purpose. Unlike walking to a destination, running somewhere, or marching, taking a leisurely stroll is a luxury. Ceremonious inactivity means we do something, but to no end. This to no end, this freedom from purpose and usefulness, is the essential core of inactivity. It is the basic formula for happiness." The way that freedom is used in this quote is much different than the neoliberal view of freedom. Instead of an economic autonomy of the self, we're talking about a freedom that is much deeper. A freedom to do whatever you want, even if it means that you're not making money at the time. And that's the first prescription to the problems that we have, is just to be a little less productive. Pick up a hobby that you aren't going to turn into a career, and do it just for the sake of doing it. And stop obsessing with self-help. Stop optimizing every second of your day and focus on creating time to just be inactive. Neoliberalism is slowly killing us through the stress and fatigue. The best way to rebel is just to stop playing by the rules and give yourself some time off. So pick up that game you've been wanting to play. And while we're fighting for a better world, why not just make one for yourself right now? I know it's hard to turn off your brain and just relax, especially because it's the culture we grew up in. But it's more necessary than ever to recharge yourself every day in order to get up and continue living. If you made it this far, thank you for watching the video, and if you liked it, leave it a like. If you want to see more content like this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. If you have any thoughts or questions, leave them in the comments. And maybe go take a couple minutes off, just sit around and do nothing. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.